Salutations, gamers! This video I'll be going over my Tamayura deck profile. With the release of June's promos, we got Tamayura's promo, which actually makes this deck feel very good now. It's definitely not like tippity top of the meta, like Ava's pretty crazy, Varga and Rezael are still good, the Stride decks are still good. This deck is like tier 2-ish probably, but this has been a really fun deck to play. So the basic idea of Tamayura is that you utilize your Direful dolls in order to get bonus effects and be able to put them into soul after they attack. And then you utilize Tamayura to call them back out and use the grade 2 skills in order to either draw cards or put the opponent's rear guards into soul. And then you soul blast out the grade 1s and then call them back out. And the whole idea of the deck is to rinse and repeat this cycle over and over and over again. So yeah, starting with the ride line, we have the grade 0 Tamayura. This one matters because our grade 1 Tamayura needs to be placed on top of it. So whenever it's placed by riding from the grade 0 Tamayura, you check top 7 cards of your deck. You choose up to one Rirami or Ravami or a Fox Art order and then add it to hand and then shuffle the rest back in. So this essentially recycles your discard cost because you discard the rider and then you instantly get to search for something, which is pretty good. The tutor effect is actually pretty important because in some early games, we want to have like specific dolls or we find the ones that we're missing. So this just like makes the deck more consistent that way. And then we are playing the grade 2 Tamayura. So whenever it's ridden over the grade 1 Tamayura, then you can add any Rirami or Rarami from your drop zone back into your hand. So this essentially just refunds our discard cost. There are some aggressive plays we can make early game where we end up soul blasting out different dolls and then we can use this to add them back. Or we can just discard a doll for ride and then whenever we ride this, we just add it back. Like no matter what, this will generally get us a doll back if we're like paying attention. And then the last one is the grade 3 Tamayura. So at the beginning of your ride phase, you, the player, get the skill that all of your front row units have plus 5k power until end of turn. Whenever it attacks, you counterblast one, and then you can do one of two effects. You can call a card from your soul to rear guard, or you can call a Rirami and a Ravami from your soul to rear guard. So Tamayura is pretty solid because of that extra 5k buff. Together with Persona Ride, once we start being able to Persona Ride, we'll be able to get plus 15k power to our front row essentially. And then we easily have 5 attacks from Tamayura being able to call 2 dolls out by itself. A lot of the time we are not staying on this Tamayura though, because generally we will be riding the second form of Tamayura, Willowwisp Daybreak Tamayura. So whenever it's placed from riding the other Tamayura in our ride deck, you can search your deck or drop for any order card without Regalis piece and add it to your hand and then shuffle your deck. And then you activate Persona Ride. And then it also has whenever it attacks a Vanguard, you bind the original Tamayura from your soul. And then you call a Rirami and Ravami from your soul. And they both get plus 5k power until end of turn. And then at the end of turn, you ride back into the original Tamayura. So this new form of Tamayura is very strong. At a baseline, because it can Persona Ride over the original version, we're able to get that plus 5k boost from the original version still, and then be able to Persona Ride into this. And then at the end of the turn, we'll be able to ride back into that Tamayura, so then we can keep doing that each turn. So essentially, our Persona Rides will consistently be 15k, but the rest of what this does is also really good. So it being able to search for an order is actually very impactful. Tamayura has a few good orders that it could search for that we'll go over later, but also we can search out Sanctitude. So if we're in like a Stride matchup or against like Jejeweled, we can guarantee get Sanctitude to Perfect Guard and attack. But we can also do that just like in any matchup. So like that plan's good into Zorga as well. So there's just like a ton of flexibility with what this card can search for. The on attack skill is generally just better as well because it doesn't cost a counterblast. It also gives plus 5k power to the things we call, so we're just actually hitting bigger numbers. So after this swing, they're essentially plus 20k from Persona Ride, the plus 5k from the original Tamayura, and then the plus 5k from this on swing effect. So overall, this card's very good. We don't play more of the original Tamayura because we just essentially want to ride this every single turn. And now the reason we're talking about this deck is the new promo for Tamayura. Stealth Fiend Kawasohime has the skills that whenever it's placed on rearguard, you can Energy Blast 3, look at the top 7 cards of your deck, and call any grade 2 or less glitter unit from among them. And then second effect is act on rearguard if your Vanguard is a grade 3 Tamayura Tamayura, you could put it in the soul, and then search your deck for up to one Willowwisp Daybreak Tamayura and ride it as stand. If you did not ride or activate Persona Ride this turn, then you activate Persona Ride. So this card is very crazy in here. Just off the second effect, we really don't like having to stay on the original Tamayura. So having a way to basically accelerate into the new Tamayura is very strong. What this also basically lets us do is allow us to tutor for an order as well, because this requires any grade 3 Tamayura. It doesn't have to be the original one. So if you're needing multiple orders, so like a blitz order defensively and a normal order to help set up your offensive pressure, then you could ride into this normally, activate Persona Ride, search for one of your orders, and then you can use this, put it in the soul, and then ride another Tamayura. And then you get to search for another order that way. In that process, you go through your Persona Rides quicker, because this can only Superior Ride from deck, not from soul or hand or anything. But that is an option that this deck has access to. It's also just 8 more copies of Tamayura. So the big thing with this deck is that we need to be able to Persona Ride consistently each turn in order to actually hit numbers, because our units don't really naturally gain numbers themselves. They rely heavily on Tamayura and Persona Ride. So this card making that more consistent is very big. And now the first effect is also still really good. So being able to Energy Blast 3 to call any grade 2 or less is really powerful. And there's actually a really sick combo that I'll show off later on, where you can have a very aggressive turn on turn 1 without really committing cards from your hand. The one neat fact about this is that it doesn't require the thing you call to be the same grade as your Vanguard. It just has to be a grade 2 or less glitter unit. So you could call a grade 2 Rirami or Rarami while you're on grade 1, which is really powerful. And then if we have an 8k booster behind it, then we swing 18 to the 8k. So we can hit over defensives now. So this card just gives the deck basically everything at once. It makes its early game more consistent, and it makes accessing Persona Ride way more consistent. The other big thing about its second effect is that it essentially deck thins 2 cards out of your deck, because this will go into soul, and then we ride Tamayura, and then we add any order to our hand. There are a ton of ways to deck thin in here. Her first effect does it. There's an order that deck thins 2. Tamayura herself deck thins 1. Our ride line deck thins 1. There's just a lot of like random deck thinning this deck has that makes it actually quite easy to hit triggers. And this card, it pulls a lot of that weight. So yeah, this promo is very good. Don't spend $40 a copy on it right now. Not worth it. Wait a little bit. Hopefully in like a month it will go down. But right now, no. Don't do that. Next up, we'll finally talk about the dolls. So first up is the grade 2 dolls. So we have 4 Rirami and 4 Rarami. They both have the effect that whenever they're retired from Guardian Circle, they go into soul. Rirami, whenever it's placed and you have a Rarami on your field, then you can Soul Blast 2, choose an opponent's rearguard, and it gets put in the soul. And then there's Rarami, whenever you play it and you have Rirami in play, then you can Soul Blast 2 and draw a card. These are our main attackers and call targets from our Tamayura effects. The big thing that's like a skillful thing in this deck is being able to optimally use Rarami as much as possible, which like doesn't seem that difficult when it's just like, oh, on play Soul Blast 2 draw. But you have to sequence in a way where it's like pretty consistently being able to do that. You should be able to get 2 procs off every turn, and in some rare scenarios 3, but a lot of the time you aim to get 2 procs off of it, because between that, drawing 2, your twin drive, and then your Persona Ride, and then also adding an order to hand, we are adding 6 new cards to our hand every single turn, and that's really impactful. The Rirami side is not as used. There are like specific matchups that you use this on. So like against Zorga, you could put the Roaming Prison Dragon in the soul. You could put Obscudate in the soul on Ava's board, because their order only prevents retiring, not targeting. So we could target it, put it in the soul, and then they essentially lose 10k shield off of that. And also on like kill turns, you can put in the Interceptors and just make it harder for them to guard. I haven't gone through every single matchup, so I couldn't give you like an extensive list of what to put in the soul. I've only like just picked up this deck recently, but there are definitely cases where this effect is very powerful. So yeah, these are our main power play. One of them pluses us and the other minuses the opponent. Very rarely you do both at the same time, because you're usually calling both of them together, but for the most part you're going to be spamming Rarami's draw effect a lot of the time. Next up are the grade 1 dolls, which is Rarami and Ririmi again. They both have the effect that whenever they're both Soul Blasted, you Counter Blast one and call it to the back row, but they have to be behind the opposite doll. So for Rarami, she has to be called behind a Ririmi, and for Ririmi, she has to be called behind a Rarami. Saying these names out loud makes me feel like I'm a 3-year-old trying to speak. Ririmi? Both of their second effects are pretty different. They both start off with, at the end of the battle that they boosted, you put all of the units in that column in the soul. For Rarami's side, if she put a Ririmi in the soul from the effect, then you give one of your other units plus 5k. And then the Ririmi side, whenever it puts a Rarami in the soul, then you can Soul Blast one and counter charge. But you can only counter charge this way once per turn. So both of these are very good in here. The Rarami side, giving additional power really helps for this deck. It's essentially the only way outside of the Tamayuras that give power in here. So at a baseline, it swings for 18k on that column. You put it in the soul, and then on the other side, it swings for 23k, which both of those demand a total of 25k shield, which is good. But it can also boost up your Vanguard as well. So sometimes we might not have a booster behind Vanguard because we typically have our dolls behind rear guards. And the only real booster we can have behind Vanguard is the promo. But the promo usually gets rid of itself. So unless we have an excess amount of them, then that typically doesn't happen. So this plus 5k boost can be given to Vanguard as well. So then on grade 3, it can swing for 18 by itself, which a 15k no longer 2 to passes, which is really big. It just makes these numbers a little bit more awkward to guard for the opponent. And then the counter charge part, we're essentially spending all of our counter blasts on these two, and we are using them quite a lot. Because how the combo goes is we swing with our Vanguard, we call both the grade 2 dolls, we use Rarami effect to Soul Blast both the grade 1 dolls to draw a card, and then we use both the grade 1 dolls effects and Counter Blast 2 total, and then call them in the back row. So then we basically called a full field again. And being able to counter charge that way is really big. There's also times in main phase, whenever you call one of the grade 2 dolls, that you use the effect, and you can Soul Blast out the grade 1 dolls in order to call them out. So a lot of the time we're spending minimum 2 counter blasts a turn, but we can spend upwards to 4 depending on the situation. Being able to have access to counter charge makes the deck be able to play a longer game more consistently. And if we're ever in a point where we don't have access to our second form Tamayura and we have to stay on our original form, then that can make the turn quite expensive because now we're essentially spending 3 counter blasts a turn minimum instead of the normal 2. So yeah, the counter charge comes in big. Both of these are really good in here because the deck's made to use them. So that's it for the dolls. We're running a playset of all of them, keeping it nice and simple. This deck is like not difficult to build. It kind of builds itself. Next is our orders we're playing. We're playing quite a bit because this deck actually has access to pretty good orders. Our primary one we're playing is 4 Broken Toys. This card used to be $40. Now it's like $5 to $10, which is a lot better than what it was. Way more affordable. So you can only activate it if you have a Tamayura Vanguard. You check the top 7 cards of your deck, and you choose up to 1 Ririmi and up to 1 Rarami and put them in the soul. You can also grab them from drop. You look at the top 7 cards of your deck, you choose up to 1 Ririmi and 1 Rarami among those 7 or in your drop zone and put them into your soul. And then if your soul has both Ririmi and Rarami, you get to draw a card. So this essentially helps set up our soul very easily. It deck thins 2 cards by itself, and then you draw, so you can technically say deck thin 3. You potentially draw a trigger off of that draw effect, so it's not guaranteed a deck thin, but that draw is really big because it replaces itself. So you essentially just play this order, get 2 pieces into soul, and then draw a card. So your hand is net 0 in card economy, but your soul will generally be +2. It also allows you to more aggressively discard your pieces as well, because this can put them back from drop zone into soul, which is really big. It's essentially a soul charge 2. You typically want to play these early game. Once we get later in the game, then there's a different order we want to play, but for the most part, Broken Toys is our early game play in order to help set up for the rest of the game. The more we get to activate these early on, the more set up we are to be able to spam something like Rarami more often. Next is the other normal order. which is Scarlet of Fluttering Evanescent Life. Evanescent? Yeah, Evanescent. So it's a grade 3 order. You play it with Soul Blast 2, and your Vanguard needs to be a Tamayura. And then you choose a Rirami and a Varami from your drop zone and call them. So this card is very big later on in the game, because a lot of the times how our board state is going to be is after we attack with Tamayura and call a board, our units being put back into Soul is mandatory from the grade 1s. So by the end of it, we have no rear guards, which is generally a good thing. This essentially allows us to build a board out of nothing, because what we do with this is we Soul Blast out the grade 2 dolls, we call them out, and then we use Rirami to Soul Blast the 2 grade 1 dolls to draw, and then we do the grade 1 dolls to call them back out. Now, a lot of the time, you're not going to be going all the way there on spending all of your resources to build a board out from Soul. What this usually does is we have like one piece in our hand, or we have the promo, and then we call the promo and call a piece from our deck. And then we use this to Soul Blast 2, call 1, and then we use Rirami to Soul Blast the grade 1 we're missing, and then Soul Blast a random card like extra Tamayuras or the promo, and then call that back out for CB1. And then the grade 1 Rirami will refund that. So we essentially just spend 2 CB that turn to build a board. There's just like a lot of cool things you can do with this. You could debate putting this up to 2 and taking out 1 Broken Toys, because this card is like pretty necessary late game in order to keep rebuilding our boards. And it's also tutorable from Tamayura, so we can grab it from drop. So we essentially have like infinite copies of these every time we can reride Tamayura. So yeah, this card is just like really impactful and very important for this deck strategy in order to keep up momentum each turn. And then the rest of the order package is Blitz orders. So we are playing Tamayura's Blitz order, Fleeting Shine that lights light. So you play it with Soul Blast 2 if your Vanguard is a Tamayura, and then for the rest of that turn, your Vanguard gets the skill that all of your opponent's front row has minus 10k power until end of turn. So this is a continuous effect that it puts on Tamayura. If you played Premium in the past, then this is a lot like Shirayuki from V Premium, where whenever you guard with it, you minus 10k things, but this is better than Shirayuki, because this is just a flat minus 10k to the opponent's front row, no matter what happens. So against a deck like Regalis, where they call something mid-battle phase, if you use this earlier in the turn, the thing they call in the front row will still have minus 10k, since this is just a passive effect that your Vanguard will have, and not directly targeting the units, which is really big. This can essentially, at minimum, against 3 attack decks, be 30k shield, just like split apart. It can negate Persona Rides, so some decks rely on Persona Ride for their numbers, but if you have this, then you can turn off that power boost, and the turn becomes infinitely easier to guard. So like against Varga, this can be pretty good. Against Regalis, this can be pretty good. Now, once set 2 comes around, this effect is not as impactful, because then there'll be more going tall decks instead of going wide decks. So we'll have Zorga be in the meta again, and Zorga will just like have astronomical numbers. The impact of like putting a 55k to a 45k swing is not as big. Putting a 35k swing to a 25k swing is really impactful, because that turns it into a 1-card guard. And then there'll also be Blank the Maya, which is also another deck that builds tall, swinging for like 80k, triple crit on their Vanguard or some silly thing like that. So yeah, this is very matchup dependent. A lot of the time in like the going tall decks, you just kind of pretend this doesn't exist in your deck. If your meta is more along the lines of the going tall decks, then you can play Defensing Roar instead. That could preserve more shield that you can reuse later on in the turn. But overall, this is a pretty good effect. One of the main reasons you would like to play Tamayura is because this card can be pretty crazy in specific matchups. And I will just quickly run through the staples. 3 Sentinels and then Sanctitude. Pretty normal. Sanctitude is kind of a necessity in here compared to most other decks, because it's tutorable. So being able to have a tutorable Perfect Guard is really impactful. Now, the big thing about this deck is you don't care about Regalis pieces that much. There isn't really like a Regalis piece that fits this super well. One, because it's not tutorable with Tamayura, but also like they're all pretty awkward. So like Gratias Gradle we don't need, because we already have the promo, which gives us additional Persona Rides, and it's just generally better in all cases. There's Angel Ladder, but we already clear our board. So like the only reason to play Angel Ladder is just to like cycle itself. There's Forbital, but all of our important rear guards are grade 2 and grade 1, so we don't super care about Forbital that much. We also want to keep our Tamayuras in deck, so Forbital doesn't really help. You could play Transfer, but that mainly like interferes with Soul. A lot of the like skill check for this deck is maintaining Soul and managing it very well. That's like the most playable one at the moment. One you could play is the new one coming out in Festival Collection. It's like something Caliban or whatever. Whenever you use it, you can either draw 2 cards or put it into Soul and countercharge 1. So that one is pretty good. It's better than Angel Ladder in the case of being able to cycle itself because it'll net you +1 in card advantage. The countercharge point doesn't really come up. If you're playing the deck well, then like Counterblast becomes a non-issue a lot of the time. So yeah, the Regalis pieces don't really add anything, but if you do want to play one, the new one in Festival Collection is your best bet. And now for trigger lineup, we have 8 crit. Nothing much more to say. Soul and crits, I haven't had a situation where they are impactful, but there will be times where it probably can be. It's definitely just like better to have than to have this, because the 5k boost doesn't really change any of your numbers, but the 2k boost this can give, if you have an 8k booster behind Vanguard, it can make it 23k, which is like a better number. But like a majority of the time, like basically every game, you won't have space to even call this. But yeah, that's just like a slightly different thing. If you don't want to buy effect crits, you can play normal crits. The deck will perform exactly the same. Next, for heal, I'm still like figuring out the deck completely. I'm not worried about teching out different heals in order to counter specific matchups. Probably when set 2 rolls around, you play the anti-crit heals, where the 25k shields if the opponent is 2 crit, not from a critical trigger. Just because that'll be like better into Blangdemeyer and into Zorga. And then if you're playing Defensing Roar for that meta as well, then that's like really impactful. It's also good into Ava. Yeah, you probably play the crit ones. Now that I'm thinking about it more, but I haven't thought too hard about it. This is literally the first time I'm thinking about it. So yeah. Either way, for heal, there is a slight debate in my head right now where I cut down 1 heal, because this deck tends to be very aggressive actually, which you wouldn't think about, but you just have like a ton of random shit that just calls stuff early game or just nets you advantage. So like if you hit your broken toys and put in the grade 1s off of them, then on grade 2 you can like soul blast them out off your grade 2 dolls and then call out the grade 1s, and then you can have a full board. It's actually pretty consistent on how often you can have a full board in here. So there is a debate because of how fast this deck kind of plays, where you will typically have less damage than your opponent throughout the early stages of the game, and you can cut a heal for like a front and like more of other triggers. That is a debate in my mind that I'm going to test out at some point, but right now this is just like a very basic bare bones list, so I'm playing 4 heal, but that is an idea that you can try. Next, 3 draws. This could realistically be fronts. It's just personal preference. Like this deck has a pretty fast early game, so fronts can be pretty big on being able to just push for damage. Right now I usually try draws first whenever I play a new deck, because I like seeing if like the deck's defensive capabilities are hard to manage. But this is also a like pretty piece reliant deck, so having the draws, being able to draw into more pieces is good. You're also not too worried about the 20k shield a lot of the time, because you can guard with the grade 2 dolls and they will go to soul. So this will just generally make like awkward numbers become like okay to guard. So like 18k is a very awkward number. This is a 10k shield against that. 33k is also kind of awkward. So yeah, the 10k shield is good, but fronts are also like definitely viable, because you typically call out a full field early game, and then if you swing with your Vanguard first, then you rip that front, then dear lord, your opponent's going to take 3 damage that turn. So yeah, either works. I'm trying draws. Both are fine. If you're playing Defensing Roar in here, then you probably should play fronts, because then you just generally have more value off of Defensing Roar. And then last, the boogeyman of the format, Drag Vader, the overtrigger. Now, there is like some debate you can have with your overtrigger. The Eidos Faro, the blue overtrigger, is also pretty good. Valknot can be okay. If you do use Valknot, then don't boost the first swing. The effect to put in the soul from the grade 1s is mandatory. So if you do boost first swing, then you don't get the Valknot effect essentially. And then both the new overtriggers can be pretty cool in here. Being able to board wipe can be pretty impactful. The purple OT is kind of awkward because you vomit out a board off your Vanguard swing. So yeah, probably the purple OT isn't good in here, but Drag Vader is my ideal choice. Now, it can be pretty awkward with the new Tamayura because the new one has to bind the original in order to use the effect. So even if you hit Drag Veda on that swing, then you can still only use the effect once that turn, unlike something like Java, where they can use it more than once. But Drag Veda is really big because it does multiple things. One, it's card advantage. Getting additional cards is pretty good. But two, it's card advantage through drive checks, which, if you've been paying attention, there's been a lot of deck thinning in this deck. So hitting Drag Veda just essentially gives us additional chances to hit triggers, and we generally have really good odds to hit triggers because of how many cards we're ripping out of the deck throughout the game. Drag Veda is probably the best option. I think second best is probably Ito's Follow, but you don't really have issues with recovering pieces. It's mainly just for the additional crit, and then probably the light over trigger. Alright, so this is the test hand portion of the video. I think you can get a better idea of how this deck functions if you see someone play it. Usually whenever I try new decks, I build them on Cardfight area first, and then I try to do test hands on them because they have a test function on that. And before I even like take it into an actual game, I play through the deck and like get a feel for how it plays, and then see if there's like any changes I want to make to it. Luckily, with my first iteration of this, I really like the build. It kind of builds itself. Let's see. So odds were second, evens we are first. We're going first. So we'll set at energy to 0 and then draw 5. So typically our mulligan, we want to find broken toys and the promo. Now the promo isn't as necessary if we're going first, because generally why the promo is good is the Energy Blast 3 to call something. So whenever we're going second, we have like a stronger early game that way. But going first is still like a good keep. So with this, I will keep this and then redraw the 3 triggers in Perfect Guard. Now, if you know your matchup is like against Zorga, you could keep the Perfect Guard. Okay, this hand's good. We hit the 2 cards we're looking for. And then also our third best hit is the grade 1 Ririmi. This is so on our grade 2 turn, if we have this and we hit the grade 2 Ririmi off the promo, then we're gonna be able to draw off of it. And then since we won't be able to do that till turn 2, then we'll already have 2 soul from our ride line just naturally. So yeah, we are going first. So stand up Vanguard, draw. So this is kind of a fine discard right now because we're going to be able to add it back on grade 2 turn. So we will ride grade 1 Tamayura effect. We will look at top 7 and we will add the Ririmi to hand. So now we have that combination and we essentially just want to spam Ririmi as much as we can early game. And that is basically it for our grade 1 turn. We could do Broken Toys here. Yeah, we probably will because now we can Broken Toys this back in since we do have the doll in hand to discard and add back. So let's see, 3, 6, 7. So we hit a bunch of Ririmis. Okay, so we will put Ririmi in and we will put this Ririmi in, put them in the soul, and then we will draw. Now this can get a little bit awkward if we don't hit another Ririmi, but we have 2 draws and the promo in order to search for it. So we should still have like a pretty decent chance to hit one. So we will draw off toys and then we will pass the turn. Typically Tamayura's turn 1s can take quite a bit because we have a couple like search functions. So this is their first turn, so now they will hit us. Ririmi will go to damage and then it's our turn. So we will draw for 10. We will discard 1, ride the grade 2 Tamayura. We add the doll back to hand. We also energy charge 3. Still getting used to that. Very hard to remember to do. So we will call Kawasohime. We will energy blast 3. Check top 7. So now we were looking for a Ririmi to call. Okay, we hit 1. So we will call the grade 1 Ririmi here. This is actually quite an aggressive play we can do here. So we'll actually call this Ririmi up front. Then we will call this Ririmi, do Ririmi effect, Soul Blast one of our ride line, and then the other Ririmi in Soul to draw a card. And then we will do the Ririmi effect, Kamas 1, and call it behind the Ririmi. So like, as you can see, it's very easy to just build a board out of nothing in this deck. It's very cool. And now, since the opponent's grade 1, we can hit them for 8k, hit them with Vanguard for 18, we drive check, we will pretend that's not the OT. Check Ririmi, and then swing 18 Vanguard, and then Ririmi effect will shove these in the soul, and then we will Soul Blast 1 to counter charge. So yeah, we're able to be pretty aggressive with this deck, which is so sick. There's actually like different aggressive options this deck has. So yeah, so now it's the opponent's turn. Let's say they ride and then they call like a column. So we'll take one, draw trigger, power Vanguard, draw, and then we will guard another attack. For like aggression's sake, we could say they called another Rio that doesn't hit, and then they hit that, and we just let it die. So now it is our turn, so we will stand and draw. We will discard. Oh yeah, we energy charge. Ride Tamayura. And then we want as good of a hit from these as possible. So this is a guaranteed search, while calling this would be a top search. So we'll use this first. It doesn't require our opponent to be grade 3. So we will put it into Soul and then ride Willowwisp Daybreak Tamayura. And then when placed, we can add an order to our hand. So we're still like in kind of the piece searching phase. So we can add broken toys off of this and just try to like dig for more stuff. So yeah, now we will play the broken toys. So we will look at top 7. We also have a Rirami and drop if we need that. So there is a Rirami and Rirami here. Yeah, that's fine. Typically, we just need one of each grade 1 in Soul because they will pretty consistently just get sent back into Soul. So we will put them in. We have both names in Soul, so we will draw another Broken Toys. That's fine. Then we will call Rirami, and then we will call Kawasohime. Then we will Energy Blast 3, and then check top 7. So we call this first because generally we don't super care about the thing on board. It can matter, matchup dependent again. It's kind of hard to tell with that doing a test hand. So off of this, we hit the Rirami, so we will call that. So I'm thinking I might have messed up somewhere. It might have been worth off the broken toys to put the Rirami grade 1 in the Soul and not the grade 2, because then I would have had a higher chance to hit it off the grade 1. Yeah, so definitely a blunder on my part. Yeah, this is still like okay-ish. If we did it the other way and we hit the grade 2 Rirami off this, then we would have been able to Soul Blast 2 off it and then call something. Yeah, this was kind of like needlessly aggressive because we've already been through what, 2 Riramis? Yeah, okay. So we will swing here for just a humble 18k. Then they will go into Soul, plus 5k Van. And then we will swing with Van, bind the Tamayura in Soul. Then we will call the Rirami and Rirami. We will do Rirami's effect. Soul Blast both the grade 1s in order to draw another Broken Toys. Then we'll do both the grade 1 effects to call them back out. And then they also get plus 5k from Tamayura effect. So now we will do our Twin Drive, critical, all here. Critical, which is better, all here. That's all the deck thinning coming in clutch. So now this is swinging for 18 plus 5 from here plus 10 from trigger, so plus 15. So this will be 33 to crit. And then end of battle, these will go into Soul, plus 5k here, and then swing for 38 to crit. And then these will go into Soul. We can Soul Blast 1 to counter charge. And then end phase, we will ride back to Tamayura. So we have a very good hand defensively at the moment. And it could look like a little scary being like, oh, we don't have pieces for next turn. But we actually have it set up as long as this doesn't get retired. We would not as aggressively play this in cases where the opponent has like pretty clear-cut removal. So yeah, we will take 1 defensive crit. Let's say we go at 3 crits and a perfect guard and just stay at 3. So then on our next turn, we will stand and draw the over trigger. And now we go into main phase. We will use this effect, ride Tamayura, do Tamayura effect to add the order to hand. And since we didn't ride or Persona Ride this turn, we activate Persona Ride now. So then we will draw off Persona Ride. Okay. This grade 1 is actually kind of a good hit because now we can like commit less resources into this. So we'll call this Energy Blast 3, check top 7, call something. So we will call this Rirami. And then we will play the order. So now, let's see. So in our drop already, we have the grade 1 Rirami. Now, we probably won't actually call it off of this because we want to call both the grade 2s. So we drop the grade 2s down and then do Rirami effect. So we will Soul Blast a promo and a Rirami to draw. Then we will do Rirami effect to call it. And then both of these will go in the drop. So now again, we have a fully set up board. We have Persona Ride buff and the Tamayura buff. So plus 15k to front row. So then the rest of the turn kind of plays itself. So you go 33, Pit of Soul, plus 5 here. 38, Pit of Soul. We want to counter charge now because we want to be able to use 2 CB. So then we will swing with Vanguard. Bind that. Call both the grade 2s. Do Rawami effect. Soul Blast both the grade 1s. Draw 1. Counterblast 2. Call them back out. So now we are swinging for 36. And then we will Twin Drive. Draw trigger. Power. And then that. So then this will be 33. They go to Soul. Plus 5 here. 48. And yeah, that's essentially it. Just like test handing this deck is really good because there's like a bunch of scenarios where you can like figure out optimal ways to build a board and like figure out ways in order to utilize as many Ravamis as possible. And it helps with resource management. And that's it for this deck profile. Thank you all for watching. This decks like these where they're like pretty simple in premise, but being able to optimize little things about it, and decks that like generally deck thin a lot, or just decks that I really personally enjoy. So like my favorite V premium deck is Leopold. It does a lot of the same thing as this, just like more later in the game than early. Nova Grappler, they don't really deck thin, but they do a lot of like small minute like attack ordering things. And I still like learn a shit ton whenever I play Novas, even though I've been playing it for over a decade. Fuck, I'm old. Yeah, so decks like these are pretty cool. And the promo makes this deck like feel very great, very fun. And this is now like one of my favorite decks in Standard right now. I can't stop playing this deck. So yeah, thank you all for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. I'll see you guys in the next one.